think sort of the interesting thing is the evidence of altruism in chimps in particular, and bonobos, which again, let's talk about bonobos right after this.
Sure.
But basically that they will do things that are not advantageous for survival. They have no intrinsic purpose, and maybe even puts them in danger, but to go out of their way to help others of their group or of their kind. How do you explain that? How does that sort of fit into this larger picture that you're drawing?
I would say that it's hardwired, and you see this many times with human beings as well. It certainly has been observed among great apes and probably other animals. You're doing something to help another individual who's of no relationship to you, so they're not going to pass on genes of yours. And it might even put you in danger. There have been situations in many zoos before. Chimpanzees don't swim well. They're very heavily muscled with hardly any body fat for the most part. And they will sink like rocks in the moat. So a lot of zoos use moats to keep the separation. But there have been examples of youngsters falling in them, and an adult chimpanzee will risk his or her own life to try to, and sometimes have drowned, trying to rescue an infant that is of no relationship to them. And this has been observed in wild populations as well. In the same way that if there's some sort of crisis, I think that this is an analysis. If there's some sort of crisis that we encounter in a certain situation, looking throughout our own life histories, you can think of a time where you reached out to help someone who you don't know, you've never seen them, you may never see them again, but it's just this inherent desire to assist someone else who is in distress. And it is tied to perspective taking, it is tied to empathy, I think, as well. This idea that you're going to perform an altruistic act of some sort, which is of no direct benefit to you, other than the pleasure that you receive from it, or the sense of satisfaction that you receive from it. Because think about it, you're like, well, I don't know that person, or that chimp, whatever, and whatever's going on with them doesn't really affect me. And I guess, have you seen that show, What Would You Do? Makes me very uncomfortable to watch it sometimes. Yeah. But you do see, it is kind of a little, I think if that were more scientifically conducted, you might be able to draw some correlations there. If you walk away from somebody who's in distress that you might have been able to help, how does that affect you psychologically that you didn't? I don't know that chimps reflect on it that much as the way that we would, but they will jump to assist another individual on many occasions, and bonobos too, and many other types of animals.
Isn't there that time when a little boy fell into,
I was about to mention that as well.
A little boy fell into, this was in Chicago in 1996, a little boy fell into the gorilla enclosure. And this is in the culture, I highly encourage you all to watch the Cultured Ape on YouTube, the whole thing's there. And a female gorilla rescued him, picked him up, and brought him, her understanding was, I'm going to pick him up, I'm going to tell the other gorillas to back up. And she took him to the zookeeper door and held him there until the zookeeper came, and then the zookeeper asked her to move away, opened the door quickly, and pulled away, and he had a full recovery. So, but that's frightening. But the fact that she was able to make that cognitive leap, this is a small primate, looks a little different than me, small primate, weird-looking, hairless, upright things that we all are. And but I understand it's in distress or something's wrong. The child was unconscious, which might have been to his betterment. And let me tell you, that doesn't mean that they will always react that way. If a child fell in with the chimpanzees, I don't know. There's a lot of safety concerns there. But the fact that they're able to and there's certainly chimps that if they fell in, they would do the same thing. Probably not for us.
So I think one of the things you mentioned there is fascinating. David Hume, the philosopher, he coined the concept of moral sentiments, where in fact morality comes from emotions, and it's the emotions that we feel first that draw us to do certain things like altruism, but it's our minds that can sort of think our way out of that, so we come up with excuses. I think that that's one of the reasons why that program is disturbing to you, that, I actually haven't seen it before, but I've heard of it. What's it called again?
What Would You Do?
Right. So in that show, there'll be something disturbing going on
in a public setting.
Right, and hidden cameras see how people respond. Most people don't do anything about it. And I think that that's probably because of our sort of big brains that get in the way, or that think ourselves out of doing something that we would naturally, naturally perhaps we would function more like the gorilla in the enclosure and just do it because it's the right do, but we tend to overthink things.
Right.
And again, back to the book on when elephants weep, the argument is made there that because, in fact, this higher sort of mechanism of thinking isn't necessarily apparent in other mammals, that they feel things much more strongly than we do. So that in a sense, not only is it sort of morally, it's a moral debate about killing animals for eating, but there's a sense that perhaps they even feel the pain stronger than we do, because we can kind of, when we're feeling pain, think about other things to distract us or cope with the
Right.
pain. I don't know if this all works together perfectly, but it seems to be that in a way they are mammals, that is.
Right.
Sort of more, it's not an instinct, but it's this sort of innate moral character that they have, if we can call it that.
Yeah.
That it's only when we are in social situations and thinking in certain ways and sort of conditioned in certain ways that we can actually lose our sense of morality, in a sense. They may be morally superior. is
In
what
some
I'm trying to
senses,
say.
yeah, in some senses, yes, and it can go either way. If you continuously subject an animal of various sorts to stressful situations, that changes the chemistry and the way that their brain operates, to the point that they're not able to be as empathic. And if you have animals in optimal situations socially, where they have their needs met, if they're in captivity, then you're going to have the opportunity to see more behaviors where they will come to the aid of an individual who's in distress.
Right, so bonobos. What are they? How do they differ from chimps?
Bonobos look a lot like chimpanzees. They're from across the river in Central Africa, so they have, I believe it's about a 2 million year split from chimpanzees. They look very similar. They used to be called pygmy chimpanzees. They're female dominated. Instead of solving conflicts with aggression, the way that chimpanzees tend to, they solve conflicts with sex. So there's a lot of sexual behaviors, not necessarily intercourse, but some sort of sexual behaviors, and it doesn't, regardless of sex. So this is how they socially navigate their environments. So if there's some stress over some food that they want to share, and maybe they're running a little bit low on food, they will have a sexual encounter with the other individual and then they will share the food. Chimps don't do that. They have sex separately from that. They seem to be very stimulated by certain things in their environment that will quickly stimulate them and have sexual behaviors. This is why they're not always in zoos so frequently, because here in the United States and our background, whatever, it's a little bit unnerving, I think, for some people to watch the bonobos doing this regularly. Even though in zoos, I don't know that they do it quite so much. So it's not that they're sex-crazed apes, but their problem solving is different. Their maintaining social bonds is done a little bit differently than chimpanzees. So even though they look like chimps, I would assume that they could probably hybridize with them. They're very genetically distinct, and we are actually equally related to either of them. So they're just as similar to us as chimpanzees are. Just a little split there with them evolutionarily. And their vocalizations are different. As I mentioned, they're female dominated, so if you are a male bonobo and your mother is of high rank, then you have high rank. And you see this in a lot of primates. If you're lucky, it depends on the family you're born into. To make a sort of an analogy, I guess, to humans in that. If you're born into a high-ranking family, then you automatically get some rank based on that. So I have not worked with bonobos. I've met a few bonobos in travels around, but I have not worked directly with them. I've had some colleagues who worked with them, so I can't speak to them as extensively. But Franz has written a lot about them because had we discovered bonobos first, there are fewer of them, and they had been bred more in captivity, and a lot of the animals that we see were bonobos in research facilities and what have you. Franz thinks, and I think he might be right, primatology and behavioral sciences in general might have a very different view of human behavior because they are a lot more laid back. They're called the hippie primate. They're just a lot more laid back than the chimpanzees, and you see murder with chimpanzees. They will systematically hunt down and murder individuals in forests in Africa, and sometimes in captivity. Bonobos don't do that we have ever observed. So their behaviors are quite a bit different. So with chimpanzees being so aggressive in comparison, it doesn't mean everything that we do that they do is aggressive. But Franz thinks that we might have a different view of our own selves, and that if you're going to model, well, look at what chimpanzees chimpanzees do, and then he's very cautious about this. We don't necessarily create wars and kill each other because we see it in the chimpanzees that they do. You have to be really careful with that type of analogy,
Right.
because war is a lot about power, and if you talk to soldiers, they don't really want to be there killing people. They want to be home with their families, and it's often very situational. But yeah, so bonobos, we're very thankful for them because they offer this flip side. If they were all extinct, it would actually be kind of unfortunate. Gorillas are also very peaceful, however, though. But being that we are much closer to the chimpanzee, this is really interesting to think about. At the genetic level, we are far more similar genetically, human beings, to bonobos and chimpanzees than bonobos and chimpanzees, or us, are to gorillas. So, chimps and humans are more alike than chimpanzees are to gorillas, much less us. Does that make sense? And so even though their phenotype, the way that they look physically, being in similar environments in central portions of Africa, they look more similar, but at the genetic level, we are more like them. So, and same with bonobos. So this provides us with this opportunity to make educated generalizations about